Hello, and welcome to A Fright at Midnight. Tonight's tale is called The Hand. An old student of mine, who will remain nameless, had a wonderfully adventurous life and would always take time out to regale me with her latest expedition. She was fascinated with and an expert in uncontacted tribes, and was successful in establishing first contact with at least 4 of these unknown societies during her academic career. It's from one of these contacts that she penned me the most fantastic tale, and had it come from any other person, I would have immediately dismissed it as well-written folly. But she was not one for stories, a quite brilliant scientist and an even greater humanist. This is her encounter, in her own words. To live with and study the Kajunero Tribe had been my lifelong ambition, and the culmination of 2 decades of work, a matriarchal society where men were rarely seen. It had perhaps been the first time in my career as an anthropologist that being female had actually benefited me. The Kajunero would not allow male outsiders into the tribe. I was to be the first outsider with them. After an arduous journey of many weeks, including bouts of malaria, corrupt officials and attempts of robbery, I found myself and my female guide Prosper arrived in the Madre de Dios region of Peru, where we were met with the leader of the tribe. She introduced herself as Indluvakazi and was accompanied by one of her daughters, called Artiana. She was a woman in her mid-60s, heavy-set and with an air of authority. The Kajunero tribe spoke a dialect similar to Quechua, an ancient Incan language of which Prosper could speak. However, there was little more than an introduction before we were taken through the rainforest on our day trek to the village. The journey, I'm pleased to say, was without incident, but also without conversation, making it a difficult start. The Kajunero have a village set in a ridge between 2 cliff faces that tower above them. They are covered in a trailing vine that gives the whole village a breathtaking, if somewhat humbling appearance, with the stark jagged rock interspersed with the lush green foliage. Not that we had much time to admire the view, as on arrival myself and Prosper were ordered into a windowless hut and instructed to wait. The absence of men was apparent, with all of our food and drink brought by young women. After several hours, Indluvakazi returned and gestured us to follow her. We were taken to the edge of the village, directly under one of the cliff faces where a ceremony was taking place. I counted 20 women, none younger than 40, all stood in a semicircle swaying left to right whilst repeating what sounded like the words Che Pakari. I asked Prosper what it meant, and she said it sounded similar to a birth, as in the birth of a child, but she couldn't be sure. By the wall I saw a young man of no more than 17 years old, the first male of the tribe I had seen. He was adorned in flowers and plants all wrapped around his body. The group fell silent, and Indluvakazi instructed him to place his hand into a hole on the stone wall. He was understandably hesitant, yet she placed her hand on his shoulder in a maternal manner, and he did what she asked, placing his hand with him. It was at this point that the women started chanting. However, Prosper could not translate. Suddenly the man's face contorted. He let out a scream, one of pain and anguish, but continued to hold his hand deep into the hole. With each scream the chanting increased in volume. A few moments later the man collapsed, the chanting stopped, and he was carried away. We were taken to a hut where the now semi-conscious man had been placed onto a bed of reeds. Prosper pointed to his hand, which was scratched sore and had what looked like 2 distinct puncture marks in the dorsal side. The man was given a drink, which seemed to place him in a calming state. His hand was wrapped, and Indluvakazi carefully ate her hand in a mud-like substance. With his hand strapped down, she took a large knife and without warning severed it. The man's scream was muffled by a piece of bamboo that had been placed into his mouth before he passed out. Indluvakazi carefully placed the severed hand into a bamboo cage and handed it to Aitiana before gesturing us again to follow. We were led to a ceremonial hut which contained the same women as before by the cliff face. The bamboo cage was placed on a raised pillar in the centre of the room. A bowl was passed round and we were all encouraged to drink. The substance had a sour taste. I could not identify the ingredients. It was then that I saw it. The hand that had only recently been severed from the young man was now moving in the cage, using its fingers to propel itself, moving one side to the next as if trying to escape. The skin had also changed. No longer skin. As I took a closer look, I saw that the hand was now covered in what looked like fine grey hair. It covered all but the fingernails. The wound at the back could now not be seen, and although there were bloodstains in the cage, the appendage was no longer bleeding. Only a foot away, I was shocked as the hand launched itself towards me, aware that I was there. I jumped back as the hand fell limply to the floor. Then it started to shake, violently seizing. I looked closer. The chanting got louder. An understandably shocked Prosper refused to let go of my arm. The fingers unnaturally separated, forcing them to the side of the hand. A large, empty flesh tear was left in between. No, not empty. In it was eyes? I watched as slowly a head and 4 black eyes, 2 large, 2 smaller, emerged before 2 inch-long fangs escaped the wound. I could barely believe what I was seeing. The hand had now transformed into a living creature, a monstrosity that hurled itself around the cage. The fingers were now fur-covered legs, thinner and more elongated than before, yet the fingernails remained, containing the same marks that had been on the man's hand. What had been the thumb had now moved round and was at the back of the creature. A muscle, using now to propel it around the cage. The chanting stopped and we were taken from the room back to our hut, where the combination of the shock of what we had seen and the drink meant that we fell asleep almost instantly. We were awoken a while later by the daughter, Aitiana, who gave us water and told us to follow her. We followed her back to the area that the man had placed his hand in the hole, except where had been a semicircle of elderly women. I was shocked to see 2 lines of the village men. There must have been 150 on each side, all stood in complete silence. That's when we noticed it. Each man, every single one of them, was without their left hand, severed at the wrist. By the cliff face was Indlavakazi. She broke the silence with her chanting, intermittently striking the men with a whip made of reed. None reacted. Suddenly this chanting stopped, and there between the lines of men appeared a figure. It was the man who only a few hours earlier had had his hand cut off. His left hand was bandaged with vine leaves and held elevated upon his bare chest. However, in his right hand he carried the bamboo cage, filled with the wretched creature that had been born from his amputated appendage. He walked slowly towards the cliff face, holding the cage out before him, which rocked left and right with the force of the movement. As he got closer, I could see the creature, its eyes even larger and more set, the fingernails lost under the fur, and 2 further legs sprouted at the back. The thumbtail had now turned into a large circular lump on the rear, and the 2 fangs at the front moved independently of each other, wildly flicking out towards the man who had mothered it. He reached the cliff face and placed the bamboo cage beneath the hole that had brought this curse upon him. Indlavakazi instructed him to open the cage, which he did. The creature was hesitant for a second, but then realizing it had its freedom, launched itself onto the wall. The bamboo cage had given a false impression. It was huge, maybe 16 inches from leg to leg, with a swollen, hairy body. The fangs tasted the rock face, and the many eyes focused on the faces looking at it, before with lightning speed scurrying into the hole. As I write this tale, I barely believe it myself, had I not seen it with my own eyes. The ceremony was never spoken about, and although I did not approach the cliff face again, I could see that the hole had now been blocked with a large rock. I saw neither the man nor the creature again, and a day later we left. A fascinating tale, isn't it? Did she witness the ancient birth of a creature from man, or was it nothing more than a hallucination brought on by the unknown drink? I do not know. Perhaps one of her next letters will tell us. That story was The Hand, and you've been listening to A Fright at Midnight.